very tragic news. A young German-Israeli woman who was taken hostage by Hamas has been confirmed dead. That's according to Israel's foreign ministry. This is 22-year-old Shani Louk, who was believed to be taken hostage by Hamas after a graphic video circulated on social media showing her semi-naked in the back of a truck surrounded by Hamas militants, some of whom appeared to spit on her seemingly unconscious body. While she seemed to have a bloody head wound, it was very possible to tell whether she was alive at that point. We won't show you the video, but it is widely available online if you need a reminder.
Louk's mother, Ricarda Louk, told German broadcaster RTL that Israeli officials said a skull fragment had been identified as her daughter's based on DNA evidence. Louk had been attending a festival near the kibbutz Ram when Hamas militants stormed the area on October 7th, killing more than 260 people.
Yeah, so this was a story of, I think, great interest to people because it went very viral. The video footage of her being in the back of that truck, it did not look like in a very well state. It was actually impossible to tell whether she was still living at that point. The image, because of the state she was in and the way the militants were gathered around her, it was very evocative of not just physical violence, but also sexual violence. Whether that was the case is unknown, but there was some suggestion I saw that, well, maybe she's okay, maybe she's being actually taken to a hospital, maybe they were treating her well. I mean, they shot her or hit her or did something in the head. So she has not survived. They identified her from a skull fragment, so they've not found the body, but it is given that they found the skull fragment. Apparently it's impossible for her to still be alive. So just an example of the brutal atrocity of this terrorist attack that left 1,700 people dead in similar circumstances.
Yeah, we do know that the health ministry in Palestine has reported that at least 50 of the hostages taken by Hamas have been killed due to the Israeli airstrikes. I'm really curious, if you're the Israeli military and you have the backing of the U.S. government, why you're dropping 6,000 bombs and 4,000 tons of munition on residential neighborhoods in Gaza where many of the hostages are being held. I think a special forces mission to go where seemingly the Israeli government knows where the hostages are to go and rescue them. I'm just really concerned about the lack of concern for the hostages' lives. If you're bombing these neighborhoods, not allowing aid to enter into Gaza, imposing a blockade, removing any access to electricity, Wi-Fi, and then bombing the area, that puts all of the hostages at risk. I just wonder if the Israeli government has made this calculation that they're no longer interested in saving these hostages' lives, and why they've been such a focal point if that's the case. It's really, disheartening to see so many civilians killed in a war that seems to be a war being fought by Benjamin Netanyahu against Hamas.
I mean, the hostages' lives are at risk because they've been kidnapped by a terrorist group. I agree that the safe return of the hostages should be the main priority, a much greater priority, and I think it's fine to scrutinize and question whether what Netanyahu's government is doing, the approach they've taken, is correct, is strategic. I'm worried that killing this many innocent civilians, aside from being an appalling moral crime on its own, is just going to lead to a future generation of radical, people who had their homes blown up, their loved ones killed in this strike. Where will their sympathies lie a decade from now? Will they be, even more supportive or inclined toward terrorist activity? This is this, vicious cycle that has gone on for, frankly, in this region for millennia. It feels impossible, frankly, to solve, which is why I advise U.S. policymakers to just stay out of it and turn inward and look at matters in our own country that maybe we could have some positive effect over, rather than trying to solve a political and ethnic and religious war that predates modern civilization. But that said, the hostages would not be at risk if they'd not been abducted by a terrorist attack, and it's obvious to me. Any state is going to respond to, any government is going to respond to an attack on its citizens of this magnitude with some kind of response. They were never, no functioning country on earth would just kind of like let that go. But I think it's totally fair to criticize how Israel is handling it, and even more so on the U.S. side, how we are just writing a check for it without any strings attached.
Yeah, I think you're right to point out that there's a radicalizing effect on killing this many civilians. I think about, a human being shouldn't be able to take people hostage who are innocent and kill them and do terrible things to them, or take them and bring them into an area that's clearly a war zone where their lives are at risk. An 18-year-old soldier for Hamas, I mean, they don't have an official military. They're not allowed to because they're internationally deemed a terrorist organization. They don't have a formal government or state. But the Hamas fighters that have taken people hostage, I don't think that's a normal human being's behavior. Someone has to be made terribly sick or angry to do that. And I think about, who's fighting for Hamas today. The median age in Gaza being 18 years old. These are really young kids. 31,000 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli army in a single year in 2018. A lot of the soldiers that are fighting today must have been about 13 years old. To see members of your family killed in the thousands for peacefully protesting the occupation in 2018, when you had the Israeli military beating and killing protesters and taking them hostage, I can imagine the kind of effect that would have on a 13-year-old, that they would probably grow up to really dislike, at the very least, the Israeli military and the Israeli government. And so it seems to be a cycle that has already come full circle many times over for the Palestinians, this occupation having been in place for 75 years. And the U.S. government really seemingly is not in the side of peace if they're willing to keep funding the Israeli government, who continues to do this. And more innocent people, I think, will continue to die unless the United States is the first one to step back.
Well, right. But I think where that breaks down is, I mean, the terrorist attack was not narrowly they didn't attack Israeli military target, right? They shot and kidnapped people from a music festival. They went to people's homes. They dragged old people from their homes. They killed people at bus stops. They killed civilians. They killed non-combatants. And I know there's a certain strain of left-wing endorsement and support for what Hamas does, saying this is legitimate because it's a military response to occupation. I think any response to the situation that involves the kidnapping and gunning down of non-combatants is totally illegitimate. I know some on the left don't share that view. I think the vast majority of people can obviously recognize that that's not a legitimate response to the situation the Palestinians are in, and in the long term will not help alleviate the position they're in, and in fact has led to them dying by the thousands. This is Hamas's actions, which are just as harmful to the innocent Palestinians in Gaza as their actions were to the innocent Israelis they abducted and gunned down. So it's a horrible situation. It's a horrible crisis, and I certainly want to push for peace in the region. I mean, I want to be a vocal supporter of peace in the region. I don't know that the U.S.'s job is to push for it by pushing either party with our money in the same way you feel about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Even though Russia is the aggressor there, is it worth draining us of our financial and military resources to prevent the easternmost part of that country becoming independent or part of Russia? I don't know that that's a legitimate national security goal. And at the end of the day, that's what our federal government should be concentrated on, our own security. And is our own security enhanced by a broader conflagration breaking out in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine? I think the answer is obviously no, and the American people know that it is no. While I can sense a lot of support for Israel as the party that was attacked here, I don't think this is a moment where the American people are clamoring for another war in the Middle East, particularly a ground war involving actual U.S. troops. I think that's something that is going to be pretty unanimously opposed by everyone in both the Democratic and Republican sides, because we have seen what's gone wrong time and time again. So it's a difficult moment that I think calls for more reticence on our part, while still being very clear-eyed about what occurred, which was a terrorist attack, and terrorists are still holding people hostages.
I think when many people were protesting in 2018 in Palestine, there were citizens that were killed. There were civilians that were killed. 31,000 people were killed. Those were not official militant fighters against the Israeli government. These were everyday people peacefully protesting that they had been pushed out of their neighborhoods. Their land has been taken. Their grandparents were killed in 1948 in the Nakba when Israel military forces took up and killed and displaced many civilians so they could establish the state of Israel. So I think when we talk about the killing of civilians, we have to first talk about Israel as the aggressor and the young people that grew up with Israel, knowing very well that they were the ones who killed their relatives and their families. And I can't imagine what that does to a human being. Of course, that's going to radicalize many people who have lost everyone they know and love, have lost their home, have lost their neighborhood. And so I think without having a formal military, without having a formal state fighting against Israel, which is backed by the U.S. military, I think many people in Palestine fight back in any way they know they can. And an eye for an eye kind of cycle for these situations isn't possible when you have the Israeli military being backed up by the United States. The amount of weapons and munition that they have. I mean, you have Palestinians throwing rocks at tanks for many, many years. They were able to kill 31,000 Palestinians in a year. All of those were not Hamas fighters. I think back to how the ANC, the African National Congress, fought for liberation from apartheid in South Africa. You didn't have Nelson Mandela peacefully protesting like the whitewashed history would like to have us believe. You didn't have Desmond Tutu just advocating for them to have peace talks. At first, you had very radical action from the people fighting against apartheid. They were bombing cars. They were bombing neighborhoods. They were labeled a terrorist organization by the United States. And the only reason they were able to achieve peace after the apartheid and occupation in South Africa was because they had liberation first. They had an agreement that these people would be able to coexist peacefully, not be killed by their government if they were out of line, not be restricted to only live in certain neighborhoods and certain highways and be economically excluded from the society. And we need a similar way forward for Israel. But I think the first step is to have the major global actor here, the United States, stop being on the wrong side of history, the same way they did in South Africa.
Yeah, I don't think the indiscriminate killing of civilians helps that peace process take place whatsoever. And it seems like some on the left have this like fantasy that it's legitimate. Well, let's set aside if it's legitimate or not. I obviously think it's not. This is what makes you a terrorist, is when you target non-combatants. But also it's not going to,
by that measure, would be a terrorist group.
Oh, and I have endless criticism. To me, all governments are organized monopolies of violence. All governments are outlaws, and I don't condone their actions whatsoever. And in fact, I oppose them. But you're not going to have, this will not lead to greater liberation for the Palestinian people to kidnap civilians at a music festival. It's obviously not. Look what it's led to. It's led to thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths. Those thousands of deaths are occurring as a result of the chain of actions that Hamas initiated a month ago. It's not going to lead to the Palestinians being better off. It's wrong. It's terrorism on its own, and it's ineffective as political change. We're seeing that it's ineffective. It's leading to thousands and thousands of deaths. I think it's so obvious that this was a bad thing that happened. Hamas shouldn't have done it. It's going to make the entire world a less safe place. And it's so obvious to me that this was a very bad thing to do. And vast majority of people agree. But anyway, we gotta leave it there. Just wanted to add a production note. It's Hamas rather than the Palestinian Ministry of Health claiming that there were 50 hostages killed. So obviously we don't know for sure. Outside organizations have not confirmed that yet. And the Biden administration said it does not have any way to verify. Again, a lot of these numbers are in flux still. We'll try to verify when that is known, and we'll have more Rising right after this.